So I was originally going to do an RTX 3080 review pretty much at launch, shortly after launch. I did the benchmarks and everything. And by the way, thank your benchmarkers. That is a very hard, tedious job. It's very, very hard and annoying to benchmark a lot of games and make the charts. But ultimately, I held off with the review because I was kind of surprised with what I was seeing versus what reviewers were saying in the tech sphere. And I'm coming from a GTX 1080 with this 3080. And I think after 1 year, I can finally walk through my original logic with a bit more experience and evidence on my side. So yeah, this is not going to be your normal 3080 review. This is more of a 1 year later 3080 experience. If you're looking for benchmarks, you can find plenty of them elsewhere. This is an experience video. So the first thing I want to talk about is that this was marketed as a 4K card. All the benchmarks on NVIDIA's site were at 4K, and all the tech reviewers with early access were emphasizing 4K and using 4K as comparison across other cards and across other generations. So I bought into this card, hoping it would finally be a truly 4K card. I think even the 2080 Ti had some issues at 4K. Well, my results were not so much, unfortunately. I slightly older titles can certainly rock it. I'm looking at you, Shadow of the Tomb Raider. That's, a fairly modern, slightly older title that uses some pretty awesome visuals, and yeah, the 3080 can push it no problem. But my experience with new games is a little iffy. Specifically, Black Ops Cold War and Cyberpunk 2077 are two of the newer games that I was using as a stress test throughout the year. I played zombies throughout the year as new maps came out, and I played a lot of Cyberpunk. And yeah, I know Cyberpunk has its problems, but either, and this isn't even with ray tracing. This is just like trying to play the game has problems. So there are a few other benchmarked games that I've researched just to kind of make my point. Specifically, Red Dead Redemption 2 and Assassin's Creed Valhalla can't play 4K 60 frames per second at high settings, and even Red Dead Redemption 2 is kind of an older game. So yeah, I mean, I'm just gonna say I do not think the RTX 3080 is a 4K ready card. I don't think it can run modern games, especially looking 1 year in the future, at 4K 60 frames per second at high settings. I don't think it can do that. And I know there's DLSS, and we're going to be talking about DLSS very shortly. And I know max settings is a bit extra. But, I mean, these benchmarks that I'm talking about don't even take ray tracing into account. And yeah, we're going to talk about ray tracing a bit later. But basically, this is NVIDIA's flagship card. And if you market it as a 4K card, I expect it to deliver. And in my experience, the RTX 3080 leaves a lot on the table. If it was marketed as a high refresh 1440p card, I think things would be a lot different. So I think right now a lot of people are probably about to throw down in the comments and say, but DLSS. All right, let's talk about DLSS. I honestly think DLSS is NVIDIA's secret sauce. It is far more important than ray tracing, and it's the only reason to go Team Green at the moment for me. I think it's an extremely powerful technology and an extremely impressive technology. But this technology is not exclusive to the RTX 3080. It's not even exclusive to the 3000 series of graphics cards. So while I see it as incredibly powerful, it does not really make a case for buying a 3080 over, say, a 3070. And I can attest to how near indistinguishable it is from a native 4K image, and it significantly boosts performance. The problem with DLSS is twofold, though. The first thing is you can't rely on it 100% of the time. Fact is, not all games support DLSS, and if a game you want doesn't happen to support DLSS, you are shit out of luck. The fact that this is tech that's tied to NVIDIA makes it fairly unlikely that this is going to be universally adopted, especially when consoles, the Xbox Series and the PS5, are running on AMD GPUs. The other issue is that DLSS is pitched as a way to allow you to make ray tracing as a playable thing. And unfortunately, DLSS often cannot pull through to make your games playable with ray tracing on. It's good, but it's not that good. Also, not all ray tracing games support DLSS. It's another example of being shit out of luck. So while I acknowledge DLSS is a powerful and valuable, and I really do think it's NVIDIA's ace in the hole, I don't think it specifically makes a case for buying a 3080, nor does it work well enough with ray tracing, and the library of games just isn't there yet. Let's talk about ray tracing, though. They switched from GTX to RTX after all. It's got to be important. Well, to put it simply, ray tracing is simply not worth it at its current iteration. The performance hit is absolutely massive, even as we've had a couple of years for software developers to learn the ropes. You might be able to get 60 frames per second at 1440p on modern titles, but realistically, you're going to be dropping from 4K without ray tracing to 1080p with ray tracing. And as I mentioned earlier, DLSS often cannot completely save the situation. It can help, but you're making sacrifices. And I know there are exceptions like Control, but try playing Black Ops Cold War with ray traced shadows on at 4K, and there's just no way. You're going to be in the 40s, or your frame rate's just going to be bouncing around to an unplayable degree. Ray tracing shadows do next to nothing for me. The fact that developers have gotten so good at pre-baking shadows makes it hard to sell as of right now. Hopefully some more time will allow this to flourish, or it'll help with development time, whatever. But right now, ray tracing shadows don't do much for me. Ray tracing reflections are neat when they work. I'm looking at you, Cyberpunk 2077, where your character is not rendered in the reflection. So what's the point if you have all these nice reflections, but things aren't being reflected in them? Ray tracing does have promise, though. Global illumination and path tracing in games like Minecraft, that looks pretty neat. But we have a long way to go before it is meaningful enough and performant enough to be worth it. So for now, it's a gimmick. It's something you can show your friends. You can show that weird situation where you look at a puddle and see something cool. But it is not worth buying a 3080. So kind of in conclusion, I've been on the path to playing at 4K since about 2016. In 2016, I got a 4K monitor, and I mean, I got it for work, I got it for a bunch of things, but it allowed me to play older titles at 4K on my Radeon HD 7950, believe it or not. In 2018, I got a GTX 1080, which allowed me to play 360 era games and some modern games at 30 frames per second 4K, and that was honestly really great. If you're getting a rock solid 30 for those cinematic games, it's not that big of a deal for what you're getting, which is insane visual fidelity. And I was hoping 2020 would complete the journey with the RTX 3080, and I can confidently say that we are not quite there yet. Also, if I could do it all again, I would totally would have gone 1440p high refresh over 4K. Let me know if you want to see a video on that. But the RTX 3080 basically overpromised and underdelivered for me. I'm very grateful to have the card, and I very much enjoy it, but I wish NVIDIA was more honest about its potential and realistic about its use case scenarios.